So I talked a little bit about this in the last video, but for most genres, popular fiction and popular nonfiction, the story matters more than the writing. And for nonfiction, let me see if I have another video about nonfiction and fiction. I don't really. So even though nonfiction isn't fiction, you still need to tell a story because people respond to stories. So if you'll notice any major best-selling nonfiction books, no matter what they're talking about, there's always content. And for nonfiction, content matters more. Readers usually want to learn something, but you still have to tell that information in a way that doesn't bore them. And that's usually story. So if they're going to go interview someone, they won't say, this guy said this, and here's this content dump, which is what a lot of amateur nonfiction writers, that's what they'll do. They'll take all this information, they'll compile it, and they'll call it a book. That's fine for something like, how to heal migraine or something really basic, really simple. They're looking for quick answers. That's okay. But if you're going for popular, best-selling nonfiction, it's usually a little bit more about a theme or an idea, and you need more story, less exposition. So instead of saying, I interviewed this guy, you say, I walked into this room and I was feeling this way and he was looking this way and he was dressed this way. Like you describe the scene so that people can see the scene in their heads. That's part of the story of nonfiction. For fiction, people have been writing stories for tens of thousands of years and probably longer. We have become comfortable with and we respond to certain kinds of story, and they're really not that unique or that different. So for any best-selling popular fiction genre, there are templates. So for romance or for thriller or for science fiction, and especially for most genres, actually, there's the same template, which is a hero's journey where you have one protagonist and they start off somewhere that's not great and they have all these challenges and adventures and they become a better person or a bigger person or more courageous, and then they go back to their ordinary world. If you look at Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, there's a whole bunch of spin-offs. There's a whole bunch of charts and Excel sheets that you can get to just fill in the blanks and make sure that your story idea fits that template. As long as you think about that and do that, your book will be much more satisfying to readers because it's going to hit those crucial and necessary points that all fiction books should have. The exception is if you're writing literary fiction and possibly memoir, although people think memoir is just talking about your life history, telling your story. A lot of writers make the mistake of thinking, I want to write a different book, a new book that's totally unlike anything else. Readers aren't prepared for those kind of books, and it's going to be very hard to make that kind of a book, your new book, successful because they're used to reading a certain way and they're used to books telling them stories in certain ways, and you can't just redefine the relationship between authors and readers that's been going on for thousands of years. So you need to be aware of that whole issue because most authors aren't. Most authors are thinking about this from, I'm going to tell my story in a unique and a fresh way that's going to surprise readers. That's a dangerous way to be thinking, and that's why most authors fail and why most books don't sell. Of course, as a creative person, you can do whatever you feel like doing. Me, as a kind of creativity coach, I help people make things that matter to other people so that they can sell them and earn income so they can do more creative things instead of being that starving artist who's always frustrated and begging for reviews and begging for help and trying to get their friends to buy their books. I don't want you to be that type of an author. I want you to be a best-selling author, which means you have to learn the rules and you have to learn to appreciate and to tell a story in a certain way to satisfy readers. We'll talk more about satisfying readers in the next video. But the thing I wanted to say here was, for literary fiction, good writing matters a lot. Because also in different genres, different readers are expecting a different level of literacy. So if you're writing popular young adult paranormal romance with vampires and werewolves, those readers, they want a story, but they're not very picky about the writing. They want the story to be emotional and they want to feel it, and they want to have a really tense sexual relationship between two different people. There's things that they want in the story that you have to give them, but they're not focusing on the writing. For literary fiction, they want you to be a masterful writer, and what actually happens in the story is important, but it's not the main thing. Because usually in literary fiction, there isn't that much story. There's more like revelations of something that happened a long time ago that's being retold in this interesting way. If you're trying to write literary fiction, you probably know what you're doing, but you should also recognize that if you're not satisfying readers and they're not happy with the journey you're taking them on, it probably won't be successful. With memoir, it's very hard to have a successful memoir because most memoir focuses on famous people. If you're not famous, even if you have a traumatic, emotional, powerful story, it's going to be hard to make your book stand apart. And even if you're writing memoir, you should learn the hero's journey and you should learn storytelling and craft, because that's really going to make the difference for you if you're not famous and you don't have an author platform. So my point basically in this video is the writing doesn't usually matter as much as the story matters. If you can get the story right, your book will be more successful. And the interesting thing is, writing takes a much longer time because you have to write the rough draft. It's going to be really bad. You have to edit it yourself. You have to go through revisions and revisions. You're always honing. Every time you fix one word, you make the sentence a little better. You go through it again, you add another word in that sentence, and the sentence becomes great. You go through it enough times and you keep fiddling with it, and every sentence will shine, and you'll have a amazingly written book that still won't sell any copies if you don't have a satisfying story. You'll get comments like, this book was so well written, and so you've kind of raised the reader expectation, but if you don't hit it all just right so that they're satisfied in the ending, they'll say, this book was really well written, but the story didn't satisfy me, so I'll give it 3 stars. Even if you have a really well written book, that can hurt against you if your story isn't strong enough. On the other hand, telling a story isn't that hard because there are rules, and if you learn the rules, then all you have to do is take a couple hours to get a template and to fill in your blanks and to make sure your story hits all these right points that have to be there for your genre and for readers to be satisfied. 90% of authors are never going to do that, which is why their books aren't going to be very successful. If you want to be different and you want to have a best-selling book that satisfies readers, which I recommend you to do, take some time. There are resources down below. Take your story and print out these pages and see if you can map your story out on these templates. It may not fit perfectly, but it's usually an easy fix. You just have to say, oh, something has to happen here that does this. And once you know that, you know exactly what's wrong with your story, you know exactly how to fix it. And then it's a one-day fix. Once you fix your story, then you can focus on the writing later, but make sure you get your story right. In the next video, we'll talk a little bit about reader satisfaction and why that's a controversy.